Welcome to this audio-video interview in the days of coronavirus, which forced us to better evaluate what we had right under the nose. Amongst the other things, we just learned the possibility to talk with other people using those tools, and this time we will have an interview with an adult educator who was involved in the INCrEAsE project. The interview is realized in the framework of the European project entitled after Intercultural Competences for Adult Educators with the acronym INCrEAsE. The project is funded by the European Commission in the framework of the Erasmus Plus program, Strategic Partnership for Adult Education. The project aims at developing intercultural communication of adult educators working in formal and non-formal educational settings in order to help them to overcome the challenges arising from their everyday work with multicultural and multilingual learners population. So the focus of this project is addressed to adult educators, and an adult educator is the person who is going to be interviewed by me. We are speaking about Alessandra Viviani. First of all, I would like to thank Alessandra for her participation and involvement in the network of the INCrEAsE project, and I would like to thank her for the patience to be this kind of sacrificial victim to be interviewed by me. Alessandra Viviani is full professor at the University of Siena, Italy, but I would immediately leave the floor to Alessandra, who will present herself and her activities as adult educator. Please, Alessandra.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you for inviting me to the activities of the INCrEAsE project. I am a full professor of international law at the Department of International and Political Sciences at the University of Siena, and my main field of research is international human rights law. In this capacity, in the last few years, I have been working in a few Erasmus projects, strategic partnerships in particular, concerning the need to move forward with the human rights education at school, meaning that according to the aim of those projects, we thought that there is a need for educators, so teachers, but not only teachers, educators who deal with children and young persons in general, to have a better understanding and a better awareness about human rights and social inclusion in a way so that they can themselves, the educators, become the promoter of a more inclusive society, inclusive society that can start in a classroom, but of course from the classroom it moves out to the overall community. And we thought that working on certain competencies, in particular intercultural competencies and emotional intelligence competencies, empathy, would be a very good way of approaching human rights education and, generally speaking, approaching the need of a quality education, and therefore a quality promotion of the competencies of the educators themselves.
Okay, thanks for this brief presentation. So the idea of the INCrEAsE project is to involve adult educators dealing with multicultural students and learners. So according to what you just said about your activities, you are perfectly the kind of target we are looking for, and we can learn a lot from you. So as first question, because the previous one was just a presentation of yourself, I would kindly ask you to please share your experiences in dealing with multicultural learners. Problems faced, successful experiences, best practice. You are free to describe this kind of reality you are working in.
Well, let's give you two different examples and two different contexts. When it comes to my profession as a university teacher, I have the opportunity, and such an opportunity has been increasing in the last few years, to have classes in which I have students coming from all over the world. So I am experiencing the challenges of teaching in a multicultural context. And especially in my specific field of dealing with human rights, I have realized how different it is when you teach a subject, especially if the subject is dealing with, let's say, sensitive issues, how different it is if you talk about human rights with a bunch of people sharing the same cultural background and more or less the same level of knowledge and awareness. How different it is from when you deal with the very same topic with a multicultural class, so where you have people coming from completely different backgrounds and having a completely different level of knowledge and awareness on certain topics. It is not, and as a teacher, as an educator, you realize that you have to change your way of approaching the class, because otherwise you are not going to be effective, and you are going to lose attention and to lose impact and efficiency in what you say and what you do. What I have realized is that one way of, let's say, breaking the ice and involving more people coming from different cultural backgrounds is to try, first of all, to transform the class into a group. And so to somehow to create, first of all, a better understanding among the participants in order for to try to find with them a common level, a common path, and from there you move on and you work on the specific topic, in my case, human rights, in your specific, the specific topic you are teaching. In order to do so, in order to transform the class of individual participants or individual students to a group more involved, in my experience, using instruments coming from non-formal education is very important and works very well. So instead of sitting and delivering a frontal lecture which has zero impact in a multicultural environment, I have realized that it works much better if we do some kind of active involvement of the participants, of the students, using instruments such as, for example, role-playing, which is very useful in this context. And it gives all the participants the possibility to all start from the same position. And role-playing helps to eliminating the perceived differences more than the real ones. Of course, you don't want to eliminate differences, because differences are useful. Actually, they do enrich the discussion. in doing such human rights education through non-formal instruments, I have seen, for example, students coming from Africa discussing human rights topics easily with students coming from various European countries without having the impression that the Europeans were kind of, let's say, teaching the others how to behave. Starting from the point of view that we the Europeans, we know more, we know better about human rights. So it helps to reshape the discourse, to do it using non-formal education means. So in my experience, this works. As far as working, for example, in working with teachers instead of working with university students, working with teachers in this sense, when we have been working with teachers coming from different cultural background, again, there is a need, first of all, to give them the floor so that they can share their personal experiences by, let's say, by their own storytelling, by giving space to everybody to tell their own stories, to share their own best practices, to share their own experiences. We have realized that it's a good way in order to make all the people aware of how many challenges in common a certain profession has, notwithstanding where you come from. So in doing these storytelling exercises, teachers coming from different European member states have realized that at the end of the day, facing problems such as bullying, of facing problems such as the difficulty of engaging teenager pupils are very much the same. And so they had the possibility of further on discussing things together and looking at instruments that we were proposing as facilitators of the group with different different eyes, with different approaches, because first of all, they felt that they were in a peer situation, so in a peer-to-peer situation. So again, this has for us, for what we were doing, this has the storytelling has proved a very good way of starting the discussion. Then afterwards, of course, you introduce experts, you do more frontal teaching if you want, because at the end of the day, you also need to transfer knowledge and theories and abstract knowledge of a certain topic. But it's very good to start from sharing practical experiences among the participants.
Okay, thanks for these really interesting inputs and suggestions that we can share with other adult educators. The next one is not a real question, it's much more a game. So the focus of the project is intercultural communication. Through an association of ideas, which kind of keywords come up to your mind when you are asked to describe intercultural communication? You have mentioned already sensitivity. I just noticed
empathy,
that. Okay.
Empathy, definitely. And another word that to me it's important is group.
Mm-hmm.
A sense of belonging as well, belonging to the human race, I could say, which is close to empathy, if you want. knowledge, because in order to develop intercultural competencies, you need something about the others. And so knowledge it's fundamental. I would say that the large majority of prejudice and misunderstandings do come from ignorance. So empathy, group belonging, knowledge, and also being open-minded. So in a way, being ready for changing your attitude. So the fact that when dealing with intercultural context, or you need to you need to how can I explain it? You need to be really involved. So you need to want to do this. This is not something that comes it doesn't come easy. So you need to really be willing to achieve the result of increasing your own cultural competencies. So in a way, you as a subject, as a person, you need to make a decision, and the decision is, I want to engage in multicultural context, and I want to know, I want to understand, I want to mix, I want to change my approach. So you need to really work on the personal willingness. It's at the core, at the end of the day, it's the individual choices that will make the transformation.
Okay, I will start from some of the ideas or words that you mentioned while describing the intercultural communication. In particular, open-mindedness, sensitivity, and empathy. Did these aspects already belong to you when you entered this kind of words, or how much did education help in developing these kind of skills?
I would say a mix of the two, in the sense that certainly as an individual, I think, I might get it wrong because it's myself talking about myself. So, but let's say, I think I have always tried to be as empathic as possible towards the rest of the world. So in a way, a personal attitude was already there. Obviously, working in the particular field of research I'm working, human rights, also gives you a certain way of looking at reality by focusing on human dignity, which is by definition a common value. Having said that, I think, as far as I'm concerned, that studying, learning, and doing experience on non-formal education and intercultural education has been crucially important. So in a way, I confirm what I was telling before. You need probably to have a certain level of personal willingness to begin with, but per se, this is not sufficient. You need to build upon this personal willingness or personal open-mindedness and empathy, and you need to continuously work on to increase those competencies. So it's not that they are there and they are self-sufficient. You need to work on them. You need to increase them by studying, by sharing experiences with colleagues, by doing research, and more than anything, by it's a learning by doing process, I would say.
Okay, in the last words and in the last sentences, you just summarized up one of the aims of the INCrEAsE project we are working in. And in the other interviews I already made, another keyword which has been mentioned was responsibility. Do you think there is any kind of difference between the responsibility that adult educators have in dealing with multicultural learners in comparison with the responsibility that adult educators have in dealing with learners coming from a unique cultural model, as long as it is still possible to speak about a unique cultural model?
Yeah, well, as you said, let's assume that it is possible, although maybe it is not. But anyway, let's assume it is. I would say there is still a huge responsibility in both cases as an educator, because in the first case, in the case of the, if not unique, very, very similar cultural background of learners, to me, what you need to do is give these learners the possibility to realize that in their lifetime, they will be confronted more often than not with situations in which these seamless will not be there. So as an educator, you need to prepare learners and you need to give them the opportunity to develop competencies for the moment when they will be facing multicultural environments, because they will. One day or the other, and more often than not, they will be living in a multicultural environment, working in a multicultural environment. So as an educator, you have the responsibility to give them the opportunity to increase their intercultural competencies. On the other hand, as an educator, when you work with learners coming from different cultural backgrounds, in this case, you have, if you want, a twofold responsibility. On the one hand, you need yourself to be aware of the possible mistakes that you are going to do. So you need to be very self-conscious on how you address a multicultural environment, and you need to be cautious and sensitive in what you say and how you say it, in order to engage everybody, in order to not to leave someone behind in your educational process. Second, you have the responsibility vis-a-vis the people in the multicultural environment, because you have the responsibility of making them realize how important and how rich and full of possibilities is to be in a multicultural environment. To have them to realize that they also need to be aware, they also need to be cautious, they need to be aware of their own prejudice, because they do have that. Everybody has them, so it's not, there is nobody who can say, I don't have any prejudice at all. You need to be facilitate their process towards understanding how important and how to move in a multicultural environment. And this is very, in my experience, this is very hard, because, for example, what I realize very often in my, let's say, international classes or multicultural classes is the students' tendency to separate themselves within the class into small groups, the Italians, the non-Italians, the Erasmus students, and so on and so forth. And to have them to work together, it's a real challenge. So in the case of the experience of an educator in a multicultural environment, I think it's more challenging, more demanding, than working in an environment which is more homologous, let's say. But nevertheless, even in, as I said, even in the case of a very similar cultural background, you still have the responsibility to work on multicultural competencies.
Okay, thanks for this. And until now, we have been speaking about the adult educators. Let's focus just for one question about the learners. What is the impact of multicultural education activities on the learners? Does it really change attitudes and behaviors?
Now, as far as attitudes are concerned, I think it does. So I think that a work seriously done, so when I mean seriously, I mean on purpose. So the educator has to really engage on working on multicultural competencies. So if you do so as an educator, you will realize that there is an impact on the attitude of students. Whether such an impact will then change the behavior of the students, of the learners, I'm not really sure, because attitude is something that can remain, let's say, inside yourself and not necessarily will transform in what you do in your external relations. So whether or not then you behave in a different manner, the behavior will probably also be limited or conditioned by other factors. But certainly there is a difference in the attitude, and I could give you several examples of this that I have realized working with my students. Whether afterwards they do go out to change the world, I hope so. I'm not really sure it does happen.
Okay, thanks again. And let's close this interview with, once again, it's more a game than a question. Let's imagine you have a mirror, and on the other side of the mirror, you can see yourself at the age of 20, with your ambitions, with your fears, with your doubts, and so on. So what would you say to you, to the age of 20, about, okay, this is the one of multicultural communication, education is your path, is the right path to you? What recommendation would you give to yourself in order to, you know, enhance this kind of job and those kind of skills?
Well, I'm a very lucky person, because not at the age of 20, but let's say at the age of 22, 23, I knew what I wanted to do, and I'm lucky enough, and I'm doing it. So I'm a very, very lucky person. Having said that, so I wouldn't change that much going backwards, because what I did actually brought to what I wanted to be. Having said that, of course, you can always improve. And I would say to myself to start moving on a certain direction earlier, in the sense to have more of experiences in meeting with people who were completely different from me, with different ambitions, different lifestyles, and so on and so forth. So I would say that the recommendation would be go out and mix with the people more. Get to know more diverse people, because I have had the chance to do it. Obviously, I did, but I think that doing it from a very early stage in your life, it's certainly something that helps you a lot in growing up and in reaching for your ambitions. Probably today it's easier than it was a few decades ago.
Okay, thanks for this. I totally agree, and all the experiences are important. That is just my opinion. But there are some experiences which should be done in the right time of your life. Going abroad, meeting new people. When you postpone those kind of activities, you can learn a lot anyway. But it is not the same kind of knowledge that you can develop when you are just 20, 21, when you can absorb everything, you can get in contact with people and mix your experience with those coming from other people. With any kind of exchange is absolutely positive, and I would say the same also for the European project, because about me and you, we got in contact in other projects. Now I would say we are keeping on working and cooperating within this project, and there will be other forms of cooperations, but it is good to get to know people and to learn from other people with active listening and with open-mindedness and all the skills which more or less belong to the definition of intercultural communication. Thanks a lot for your involvement. Thanks a lot for your inputs and recommendation. And I'm sure there will be a lot of people who will listen to your interview and get something more for their experience as adult educator.
Let's hope so. I will be happy if my experience serves some purpose. And thank you so much, Antonio, for having me with you today.